Freedom from fear. It's one of those phrases that feel less like language and more like a horizon, something we walk toward even if we never fully arrive. Spoken into history by Franklin D. Roosevelt, who imagined a world where nations would reduce armaments so profoundly that no country could threaten another with violence. We are a long way from that dream coming true. Yet, even if every weapon were laid down, fear would not disappear, not immediately. Because fear is not only built into systems, it lives in us, in our bodies, in our thoughts, in our relationships. We have been conditioned towards fear and to worry. It has been said that worrying is like praying for things you don't want. Yet in the world we live in, it is valid to feel fear. In 2022, I wrote a sermon entitled The Shoreline of Courage that identified that shoreline as the place of the present moment, where we acknowledge that which we are most afraid of. That shoreline, like the landscapes in each of our lives, it looks different for every person. It struck me while writing that sermon that most of us do not carry with us or visit or encounter only one thing we are afraid of. No, the maps of our lives are marked with many fears. Our fears, like all of our emotions and feelings, are accompanied by biochemical reactions and emotional responses. Whether our fears are phobias or generalized anxiety disorders and trauma responses, they're often accompanied with other comorbidities, each stripping away pieces of our peace of mind, peace in our hearts, and the ability to see beyond fear. Always, always, compassionate and empathetic action is needed when facing our fears. Because facing our fears requires us to be open to discerning what is real and what is imagined. That sermon, the one I did in 2022, looked at several of the phobias that are commonplace and how, when we reach the shoreline of courage, we are confronted with an understanding of our fears, obstacles, real and imagined, and we discover ways we can muster courage. This sermon addresses fear on a different level. Courage is part of it. Yet not merely to overcome a fear like fear of spiders or fear of heights, but rather in regards to the things that we simply cannot change, that are reasonable reasons for fear, like corrupt politics and the environmental crisis. How can we acknowledge fear yet not be held in the grip of it? What would it mean for us to be free from fear? Not the absence of the thing feared, but experiencing a liberation even amidst it. Now, to dismiss fear entirely, well, that would be lying to ourselves. Fear is also, it's not foolish, it's ancient. It's the body's way of saying, pay attention, something matters, get ready. Yes, we live in a world where fear is often valid, it's often called for. There are neighborhoods where safety is uncertain. There are wars beyond our control and our imaginations that take place daily. There are systems that feel extractive, politics that feel domineering, and an environment that is undoubtedly in distress. Fear in such a world is not a defect. It is a signal. But a signal is not a command. It cues us to listen, lest it be weaponized. Fear weaponized is amplified through the media that prioritizes alarm over understanding. It is used in political messaging that divides people into enemies and allies. It is embedded in systems that convince us there is never enough. It is whispered through narratives that make us suspicious of one another. It is even used in personal relationships to control or silence. Fear in this form does not guide, it governs. And when fear governs, everything begins to feel like an emergency. An emergency is, by definition, a sudden, urgent, dangerous situation requiring immediate action. But what happens when everything feels urgent? We begin to live as though the house is always on fire and that a tsunami is perpetually ensuing and chasing us. Our bodies tighten, our thinking narrows, our compassion shrinks. We react instead of respond. A caution that the counter to fear is not denial, not pretending everything is fine. The counter to fear is preparation. Preparation is a quiet form of courage. It says, even if something is happening, I am not helpless. Preparation looks like building strong relationships so we are not alone. It looks like learning practical skills, emotional, financial, relational. It looks like caring for our bodies so our nervous systems can recover from stress. It looks like choosing depth over constant exposure to fear-driven information. It looks like practicing presence. Ancient Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca discerned, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Preparation gently brings us back to reality, back to what we can actually do. And while doing so, we are present to the fact that there are things that we cannot immediately change. We cannot single-handedly stop war so that our sons don't have to go fight, and our daughters. We cannot instantly transform unjust systems. We cannot immediately resolve environmental crisis or political imbalance. The path to freedom from fear calls us to acknowledge the conditions that remain, yet do not let it define us. Freedom from fear is aspirational. It is also actionable. Freedom from fear is aspirational. It is also actionable. Regarding the coalescence of climate and human-created catastrophes and the inevitable collapse of environmental and social structures, renowned author and consultant Margaret Meg Wheatley, who applies systems theory and complexity science to leadership, promoting resilience, community-focused approaches to global and environmental crises. She acknowledges there is no quick fix for the planet, that very likely there is no way to prevent the collapse. Even so, she says, we need to restore sanity by awakening the human spirit. She says we can achieve this only if we undertake the most challenging and meaningful work of our leader lives by creating what she calls islands of sanity. An island of sanity is a gift of a possibility and refuge created by people's commitment to form a healthy community to do meaningful work. It requires sane leaders with unshakable faith in people's innate generosity, creativity, and kindness. She says it sets itself apart as an island to protect itself from the life-destroying dynamics, policies, and behaviors that oppress and deny the human spirit. No matter what is happening around us, we can discover practices that enliven our spirits and produce meaningful contributions for this time. The approach is based on the simple premise that whatever the problem, community is the answer. Community has always been the answer. American theologian and farmer Clarence Jordan knew this as he longed for an integrated world. Living during segregation in the deep south of the city of Americus, Georgia, he and his wife Florence, along with Martin and Mabel England, envisioned an interracial community where Blacks and whites could live and work together in the spirit of partnership. And they did just so. They founded the first interracial farming community in 1942. They called it Koinonia. Koinonia Farm was a Christian community and a working farm. Members committed to the following principles. Some of these will sound very familiar. Treat all human beings with dignity and justice. Choose love over violence. Share all possessions and live simply. Be stewards of the land and its natural resources. It served as a beacon of racial equality, nonviolence, and shared living during the Jim Crow era. During the Jim Crow era in Georgia, they created this. Clarence called it a demonstration plot, which is an agricultural term designed often on a small scale to showcase, test, or compare agricultural techniques or sustainable farming practices. As a community, their demonstration plot demonstrated how Americans could live, work, and worship integrated. Yet they did not live in a vacuum. Even if they wanted to, the bigots of the surrounding towns in Sumner County, Georgia, persecuted them, especially throughout the 1950s. They even engaged in acts of terrorism, such as dynamiting their roadside produce stands, firing shots into the compound, and threatening phone calls and letters. At one point, the local Ku Klux Klan drove a 70-plus car motorcade to the farm to intimidate them. Clarence and the Koinoians knew they could not change segregation for the entire country. They couldn't even change it for their neighboring communities, but they could create a demonstration plot to show how it works. They did not wait for the world to change. They demonstrated and lived it another way. Over the years, it transformed. In the 1960s, with the help of Millard and Linda Fuller, they transformed it, changed its name from Koinonia Farm to Koinonia Partners. The community then began to refocus itself as a social service agency. Organization initiated several programs in partnership with its neighbors. The chief among them was a partnership for housing, which organized the construction of affordable houses for low-income neighboring families previously living in shacks and dilapidated residences. Using volunteer labor and monetary donations, they built 194 homes from 1969 to 1992. The Fullers, they brought this vision to a worldwide scale, founding Habitat for Humanity in 1976. Since then, volunteers and homeowners have built more than 500,000 homes in more than 100 countries. To this day, it is headquartered where it began in Americus, Georgia. Koinonia, making the improbable possible with their island of sanity. Whatever the problem, community is the answer. Because even in fear, something wonderful can emerge. Emergence, the process of coming into being. From fear can emerge clarity. What matters becomes unmistakable. From fear can emerge courage, that quiet act that where kindness comes forward. From fear can emerge connection, people reaching for one another. From fear can emerge creativity, new ways of living, building, and responding. Fear can be the beginning of a new story. When given time to create spaciousness between fear and reaction, a breath, a pause, a widening, in that space, we return to presence. And presence, it asks, what is actually happening right now? What is real, not imagined, not amplified? What is within my reach? What is possible, and even more deeply, what seems impossible that when called into community can be made possible? Remembering freedom from fear does not mean fear disappears. It means fear no longer decides. It becomes a signal, but not a ruler, a presence, but not a prison. Within that blessing of presence, we begin personally. We create habits that steady us instead of inflame us. We limit the constant intake of fear-driven information. We cultivate stillness through reflection, prayer, meditation, or quiet presence. We care for our bodies so, again, they can hold that stress without breaking. And we choose honesty in our relationships. Doing so helps create an inner environment where fear does not rule. We expand socially. In a world that often divides, connection becomes resistance. We build relationships rooted in trust, and then we imagine communally. What would it look like for our neighborhoods, workplaces, or communities to become demonstration plots? I believe this congregation already serves as a demonstration plot in our community, publicly promoting all are welcome, being allies to vulnerable people and to the environment, vocally, demonstratively, feeding our neighbors, gathering together for support and fellowship. We do all this and more as a demonstration to our wider community of what can be done everywhere. And in doing this, we also transform fear. Fear about isolation becomes community building. Fear about instability becomes preparation and skill sharing. Fear about injustice becomes collective action rooted in care. We do not eliminate fear. We respond to it creatively. And by modeling this, we extend our visions of freedom of fear to a world where fear is no longer the easiest tool to use. A world where people are prepared, connected, and present. A world where small islands of sanity begin to link together. As the iconic singer Nina Simone famously said about fear as a state of being during a 1968 interview, which, by the way, I encourage you to find online and watch her say this in her words. She's sitting beside a couch. She's on the floor during this interview having this conversation. It's brilliant. And she says, I tell you what freedom is to me, no fear. I mean, really, no fear. And she's talking about that feeling, not free from reality, but free from the grip of fear. And from within that space, miracles are possible. I will leave you with two questions to consider. Who would you be if you were totally free? And what would you create for a demonstration plot as an island of sanity? So think about that. And when you're ready, at any time throughout the weeks and months ahead, come chat with me about what you envision. I'd love to hear it.